Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tim. Tim, how about you start by introducing yourself?
Sure. My name is Tim Warre. I'm a writer, podcaster, and teacher trainer here in Barcelona. Happy to be on the show.
Yeah. Tim has a very popular and much used website. Do you want to tell them about your website?
Yeah, it's freeenglishLessonplans.com, a blog for teachers that I've been running since 2013. Mainly lesson plans for higher level English classes, because that's what I teach mostly, C1 advanced and C2 proficiency. But there's other stuff for other levels on there, and it's all free, so check it out if you'd like.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So today we're going to be talking about a best-selling book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. And the subtitle is an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. So this is a very popular topic these days, and both of us have lots to say about the book. I think we're both fans of the book. It's an excellent read. So Tim, why don't you start by sharing some of your thoughts about how it relates to you as a teacher and how it could also be useful for students?
Yeah, so yeah, like you said, it's been a really inspiring book. I'm like in the middle of changing my habits based on having listened to the audio book of the book about 6 weeks ago. So I bought the book on Audible, and then when you buy audiobooks and you think, oh, shall I listen to this one? Oh, I won't listen to that one now. I'll listen to another one. I was putting it off for a while, and then one Tuesday, I finished another audiobook and I thought, right, let's try this. I've never been one for like self-help books in the past, and I hit play, and it's 5 hours long, and I think I listened to it in a day, 2 days, and just found it really inspiring, and it changed my habits completely. So I think that the old me before reading it was, I've always been, I think, quite productive, but lazy and with a lot of bad habits. So eating lots of junk food, being quite disorganized, not getting much exercise, snoozing in the morning a lot. So staying in bed and having another 10 minutes of sleep, another 10 minutes of sleep, another 10 minutes of sleep. And like a lot of people having these bursts of motivation around about January or September, joining the gym, going for a week, 2 weeks, and then not going again, but carrying on paying for it for months on end.
Yeah, I know that. I think it's been 6 months.
Yeah.
I haven't stepped foot in my gym in 6 months.
But you're still paying.
It's a timely reminder.
Yeah. And I think the idea of getting up in the morning and going to the gym, it's something I never would have done, because I like sleeping a lot. And also I, like you, I'm an English teacher and I teach mainly in the evenings. So I've always had this excuse. Oh, I work in the evenings, so I'm not going to go to the gym in the evenings. And getting up at 6 in the morning, going to the gym, that's not going to happen. So reading the book has changed. So going from that, I'm now going to the gym 4 to 5 times a week. I'm journaling more, producing more stuff for the blog, writing more, producing more of my own podcast. We've started a TikTok channel. We're recording all these videos. So it's been quite revolutionary.
Yeah, you've got some stuff about pronunciation that's quite helpful. You had a post about beer and bird and bear and how Spanish speakers struggle with these. And yesterday I was in a pronunciation class a course that I teach, and a student asked me precisely, oh, we have trouble with this. And I thought of your TikTok.
Send it to them.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely had a good effect on me. And then I've started thinking about how to apply it in the classroom. So we'll talk about that a bit later, I think. But
now, this is interesting. I just wanted to stop you there because I was reminded of, this is something that without even prompting, without thinking about it, it's one of those things that a lot of the students that I teach are late teens, early 20s at university. And there's a recurring theme, a lot of them, when you talk about things like, you're talking about fitness, a lot of university students will say, I used to play basketball, I used to play football. Or I used to, and I say, well, what happened? Or I used to read for pleasure, and then I gave it up. And basically, once they get to university, their studies crowd out everything else. And I came across this article, and I think it was maybe Psychology Today, or one of these things that was just recommended to me by Google. And it was about research into the brain, and how the same area of the brain that processes language also is connected to fine motor skills. So like using your hands, and just this idea that that basically completely different activities could actually reinforce each other in unexpected ways. So like you're talking about how actually I find I've been struggling to keep up with my podcast and different things. And I think part of the problem is that actually sometimes the best way to accomplish it's like you're talking about, going to the gym, and then that actually makes other areas of your life, other things kind of fall into place. So it's almost like you talked about being blinkered before when we were chatting before about not. And so do you find that your fitness feeds into other areas of your life?
100%. I think maybe it's because of that, same part of the brain activating, but definitely feel so much more activated on a day where I've been to the gym in the morning. And I think a lot of these things are things that we know, or we've been told a million times. If you get up in the morning and do exercise, you will feel more awake and more switched on the rest of the day. But I think until you've proven it to yourself, and it's very difficult to prove it to yourself, because it's very difficult to keep up the motivation to do it. It just sounds like, the empty words that people say, you should eat more healthily, you should exercise more, you should do sports, things like that. And I think, you need to, like I said, prove it to yourself. But it definitely has a knock-on effect, like eating better and exercising. I feel, a lot better mentally for it, definitely.
Yeah, you also, another thing you mentioned was that you were kind of, because hopefully that not everyone who's listening is predisposed to take an interest in personal development or self-help. I mean, I think if anything we want, my hope is that people listening, there are people who are skeptics, because we don't want to be preaching to the choir. We want. So I'm just curious, why would you say you were a skeptic?
I don't know if it's it's a good question, because I read this book and then immediately spoke to one of my best friends here on the Saturday, the day after, and said, I've read a self-help book, ha ha ha. And he was immediately poo-pooing the idea, which is my old attitude. And he was just really down on the idea. And then a week later, he actually came up to me and apologized and said, look, you're trying to better yourself. I was wrong to criticize you for trying to do that, which is very nice of him. But I think it's because of this big image that's built up around self-help being, I don't know, pompous, or it's almost in a way against sort of typical British sensibilities, maybe. Do you think? Or
I definitely feel I would that's I mean,
might be a cultural thing.
I mean, we definitely, and I think that also we both are based in Barcelona, and so we're in the same cultural context. So I would say that Catalan Spaniards, if anything, are more skeptical. I actually feel I don't read loads of self-help. I mean, personally, I think self-help is just, where does philosophy start? And I don't know, it's for me, it's just, it's like it's pop psychology, or it's philosophy. And I think the label is kind of applied to mean simplistic, magical thinking, but but in any case, no, I'm relatively open to it. And even though I think I don't think skepticism is a bad thing. I'm just, I do find that I get kind of argumentative with my students because I find they have a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Like you were, this very much like just the idea of, like you talked about, bettering yourself, like the idea of, like, I think there's a backlash against the idea of why we don't have to improve ourselves. Like that's just sort of an oppressive idea. And I feel like, I
or
don't
losing
know.
some part of your identity, no? Like, because you're fitting yourself into, I don't know, a different sort of set of habits and set of behaviors.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, the book is quite negative on things like playing video games. I don't know if that's just the author's own opinion coming across. The idea of spending lots of time playing video games, I get the idea that he thinks that's a waste of time. I'm a big gamer, and I actually have played a lot less video games since reading the book, but I still am playing video games. So I think my friend's sort of negative reaction might have been towards that, sort of like, well, you know, that's part of who you are and you're doing it less. I don't know.
Well, I don't know if does this come up in the book? I think it must. The idea of like the people in your environment influence you. So if you're surrounded by people who I was telling you before that we started recording how one of the key ideas in the book is the idea of identity, and that talks about if behavior that you want to adopt, like it might be like improving your English or becoming fitter or whatever, if that behavior isn't congruent with your identity, how you see yourself, that behavior won't, in the long term, you won't manage to, you might in the short run manage to go to the gym for a couple of weeks, but if fitness doesn't become part of your identity, in the long haul, you'll just give up. And
you won't take on that habit.
And so in terms of identity, I was telling you how I've just lost my train of thought. This is just like in the classroom. It's embarrassing.
That's okay.
So I was thinking about giving up, quitting smoking, for instance, and how I had friends who smoked, and that does become an issue. And then sometimes you do end up hanging out with people less because so I think you have to be conscious of like the environment the people you're around.
That's one of the things he says later in the book, is like trying to surround yourself with people who have the habits that you're aspiring to. So to me, that's a bit like, well, what are you going to avoid? Your friends that you have bad habits associated with. But it is true, 100%. I think that you do take on the habits of the people around you, and that your environment has a big impact on that.
And this is maybe we were talking about how the book has an element, we'll probably get onto this, about like specific tricks maybe, or and that's, I think, often why self-help gets a bad rap, this idea of like life hacks. It's become a huge online, I mean, almost I would say a huge proportion of the stuff that we see on Instagram, it's life hacks. And that I think there's good reason to be skeptical about it. And I think maybe because I've seen this in a lot of self-help literature, this idea of the people you're closest to in your social circle will influence you. So basically, like this a hardcore version of this is weed out friends who have undesirable qualities. And if it's just I think if you just think of it in terms of habits, it just seems kind of crazy. But I think if you think about it in terms of a habit is also a reflection of a value, like your identity and your values, then I think if it's a question of values, then I think it makes more sense. Because if people, I don't know, if you're around people, let's say, who don't try to take care of themselves and basically don't have energy. I mean, I think it is a problem, because you can end up isolating. Like I find it can be tricky.
Definitely. That's the one piece of the book that I had the most issue with, I think, was that idea of I don't know, pushing yourself out of friendship groups. That was sort of what I saw as I don't know, the natural sort of result of trying to follow it to the letter. So the bits that I stuck to more were the stuff like you were talking about, the identity. So deciding on the identities that you're aspiring to and thinking about the habits that people with those identities have. And then what you're saying about the life hacks and tricks, the book is full of what seem to be life hacks and tricks. But I think it's the way he sells them and the way he bases everything on those identities makes it much more, I don't know, just gives it meaning, and you see why, and the ideas behind all the little changes and the hacks, let's say, and that idea of choosing those identities. So I went through and I chose aspiring things. I want to be, a writer. I want to be a runner. I want to be a good husband. I want to be, what's the other one? A morning person. Because one of his other things is that you have these ideas of your own identity. You decide, I'm not a morning person. And then that identity is reinforced by your habits and by the way other people perceive you. Yeah. So like, for example, my wife always sees that every morning she's getting up at 7 o'clock in the morning and I'm snoozing till 9 o'clock. Then obviously she's seeing you're clearly not a morning person. And one of the parts of the book, he says, you can rewrite those identities. So yeah, those are the sort of identities I chose. And then I followed the steps in the book to try and take on those identities. And for now, for 6 weeks so far, it seems to be working. It's always the whole thing about a work in progress is getting 1% better every day, is what the book talks about. So it's not huge changes, it's atomic changes on a very small atomic level.
Yeah, it's like there's a saying I love, the devil's in the details.
Yeah.
Well, and I always like to think, I always say like, well, I'd like to get a bit mystical. Say, well, actually, I think it's God that's in the details, but then that opens a can of worms, because people go, oh, I don't believe it. Well, anyway, that's not the point. But I mean, the devil in the details kind of suggests that it has a negative. I think it's the idea that there's so much of value in small things. That's so I think that's why the title is apt. So maybe we could think about, in the context of language learning, and we're both English teachers and both work primarily with higher level students. Do you think, you talked about, you came up with a list of some of the, well, we don't want to call them hacks. Techniques.
Yeah. So the techniques, he talks about starting with raising your own awareness, raising awareness of your habits. So being able to identify what your habits are, which ones are good, and analyzing them. So one of them, last night, I tried to implement I'm trying to implement these exact measures with my group of C2 students. So the first one, he says, is to go through your daily list. So take a typical weekday and list all of your habits, everything that you do. So wake up, check my phone, make the bed, go to the toilet, have breakfast. So even down to the most mundane thing. You make the list and then you go through and you have to analyze them. Are they good habits, bad habits, or neutral habits? So something like go to the toilet is a neutral habit, it's neither good nor bad. But maybe lying in bed, checking your phone for 10 minutes in the morning is a bad habit. Making the bed's a good habit, for example. So it's raising awareness of what your habits are and analyzing a little bit which ones are good, which ones are bad. And then trying to make a list of what you would like your habits to be. So you've thought a bit first about the identities you want and the habits you want to take on. And then you're making a sort of comparison to your current habits versus your target habits. And that's what I've started to do with my students yesterday. I had them make that list, initial list, and analyze and find some little bad habits here and there. And then look for times of the day where they could fit in some short, easy study habits. So my habits that I took on weren't study habits. They were things like, I want to get up earlier, not snooze, make the bed, read before I go to bed, things like this. But with my students, I was looking for times of the day, like I said, where they can fit in study habits. The next step is planning exactly when you're going to do those habits. So a time, a place, and a method. So the one I had was I wanted to start working out at home. So I had to say exactly what time, exactly where, and exactly how I was going to work out. He talks about, in the book, he talks about a study in a university in London, I think it is, where they had 3 groups. They had a control group of people. Basically, they were trying to get all the people to exercise more. So they had one group who were just told to exercise more, and they went away and tried to exercise more. Another group who had to exercise more, and they were shown a presentation about the importance of exercise. And then a third group who had the same, so they had to exercise more, they were shown the presentation, and they had to make an exact plan of where, when, and how they were going to work out. And it turns out that there were huge difference between the third group and the other 2. Okay, so this idea of planning exactly where, when, and how you're going to do something leads to much higher chance of you actually doing it.
Yeah, that reminds me of there's a neuroscientist, an ophthalmologist by the name of Andrew Huberman, who has a YouTube channel and a podcast. And the good thing about him is that, well, James Clear, he bases his book on research. He's himself not a researcher. I always like to kind of connect these ideas to actual researchers, for those who are really, hard-boiled skeptics. And Huberman talks in one of his episodes about visualization, and talking about that that's also connected to visualization. So actually rehearsing in your mind all the steps, like if you're planning to go to the gym, like imagining, okay, tomorrow at 7:30, and then you've got your imagining yourself putting your kit in your bag, and imagining all of the
tying the laces on your trainers, the walk to the gym, everything. Visualizing the whole thing.
And so, like, the thing is, this has been studied. The reason I mentioned Andrew Huberman is, like I said, this gives it maybe more not validity, but I mean, this is, he's a top research scientist at Stanford. He's and he talked about this as like a particular form of visualization that's effective.
Yeah, definitely.
And so in terms of the types of activity, like so you're suggesting to your students that they really get more granular about when and where and how they do things. And what about the what? What sorts of tasks would they be doing?
So the first thing I had them do yesterday, basically, I took the whole hour and a half of my class with the C2 students going through a session on habit formation. And first, I asked them about some identities they would like to have in English. So instead of just saying, I want to improve my English, something really vague, we had them talk about they want to be the kind of person who can give a speech or a presentation in English, for example. Or they want to be the kind of person who can follow a conversation with multiple people in a bar and make jokes and contributions, things like that. So I gave them a few examples, and I also wanted them to come up with some other identities. And some of them talked about the kind of person who can read scientific papers, because lots of them at university. So we thought about those identities first. Then we did the granular habit analysis, and looking for those times of day when they could incorporate the habits. And then when it came down to the what, a lot of them were like, I'm not sure what to do, but I had the list of their identities written on the board. So I said, see if you can tie them into this list of identities you've already come up with. And so a lot of them immediately went to, okay, I'm going to start reading in English. We're actually reading a book together as a class. So this was good for them to identify times when they could they could read a chapter or two of the book that we're reading. Or they could read a scientific paper or some online journal or something that's related to their field of study. But then the end of the session was me showing them how to use Quizlet, to use an application on their phones to study English vocabulary. And the aim is to get them to study for 5 minutes a day and study 10 words or 10 phrasal verbs, 10 idioms for 5 minutes a day, every day. So I was trying to say to them, look, you only got to find 5 minutes. A lot of them are university students. They're very, very busy. But I'm saying to them, look, you only need to find 5 minutes a day, but you have to tell me exactly where and when those 5 minutes are. And I will send you every week these Quizlet flashcards. So it's flashcards where on one side they've got an expression and an example sentence. One of the ones we did was a list of sports idioms. So it was like step up to the plate. And then they have, it's time for John to step up to the plate and take responsibility for his actions or something. And then on the other side, they've got the definition. And the idea is that they sit down wherever they are, on the toilet, on the bus, on the sofa for 5 minutes a day and study using the application. So first of all, they came up with their own habits they'd like to do, the reading and things like that. Then I showed them, you only have to do this for 5 minutes a day. Yeah. And then they had a little play. They spent 5 minutes in class doing that.
I'm curious, what are you reading, a fiction or nonfiction?
Fiction. And it's going quite well. I've never done it before because this is a proficiency advanced group. I've had like an adult conversation class where I've read books before. This is the first time I've done a book with an exam group. Mm-hmm. And it's going quite well. I think they are reading, most of them are reading it and following along. But sometimes one of them falls behind, but that's quite good because you get the others to explain what happened in the chapters that they've missed, which provides sort of an opportunity for them to explain it well, because the other person has to understand and follow their explanations of the plot that they've missed. So yeah.
One thing I was thinking about in terms of, because we've talked before about, well, I'm also a fan of Quizlet, and also because I mean there is a lot of research to support its the use of not necessarily Quizlet per se, but flashcards.
Yeah.
Paul Nation, who's a professor emeritus, I think it's in Wellington, New Zealand. I can't remember the name of the university. Victoria, I think it's called Victoria University.
Okay.
And he's, I think, well, he's got a good reputation, and he's actually got an ebook called, if I'm not mistaken, it's What You Need to Know to Learn a Foreign Language, something like that. And it's broken down into about 8 chapters. And this is an example of something that it's kind of like, we were talking before the show about different things we wanted to bring up. And one of them was kind of the move away from the teacher as just teaching the content to a broader, you talked about the idea of like the book and awareness. And sometimes when I'm talking to my students, I get a bit mystical and I go, well, all learning is awareness. Like it's really, it's just this sense that there's something bigger that you haven't fully grasped yet. And just that sense of, there's something for me to keep reaching for. but I mean, I think 20-year-old students just look at me and roll their eyes like, this is not useful, Sean. But
when are we going to study more phrasal verbs or something?
Exactly. But one thing I would love to do is incorporate, I mean, I do put a link to this document on the platform that we use and encourage students to look at it, but I think I need to actively, because there are very specific, what he talks about very specific approaches to learning. And one of them, he talks about flashcards and how, I don't know, in terms of uptake, there's a huge difference between students who use other methods of revision and those who use flashcards. Because I feel like part of the challenge is if learners, we can feel based on our experience that something's effective, but if we don't get our learners on board, it's almost like that, convincing learners. I don't know if it's convincing, because I mean, what do you think? Is it just a question of us saying, do this? And
well, I think during my career, I've done a lot of do this, please. And I've provided my students always with lots and lots of extra materials and places they can go to read and to use flashcards and things like that. But the actual uptake, the number of students that actually do it, has always been very low, unless they've got like an exam. If they've got the advanced exam in 2 weeks, and I'm tracking their use of Quizlet, for example, there'll be this flurry of activity. They'll all be on there, cramming at the last minute, doing as many exam tasks as they can. That's why I think the way to approach it maybe is something more tied in with habit forming and making it easy and but I think they have to see some sort of result from it, I think we're not supposed to be, the whole book talks about not being really objective focused and focusing on your system. But
and that's something we done. So this idea of moving away from goals, because he makes this point that people those who fail and those who succeed, we all have the same goals. And so goals don't set apart those who are successful, so it's the system. And we're going back to this idea of the devil is in the details, or the good things are in the details. In the book, there was this interesting example of the British cycling team and how they'd been so appallingly, they'd just been the most underperforming team in, I don't know, the world, or in Europe at least, and that they were so bad that one well-known brand wouldn't even sell them their bicycles or their equipment because they were afraid.
They didn't want to, they didn't want to see British cyclists riding their bicycles.
The British, there was just this huge stigma. I mean, that was how bad they were. And then he gives examples of how they took on this new coach. I can't remember his name.
David Brailsford or something.
Yeah, that sounds right. And how they kind of were relentless and looking at every little detail, and like the vans which they used to transport the bikes. They painted the interior white so that they could see any specks of dust that might get on the gears and
because the bikes are really finely calibrated.
And all kinds of weird things. Like I think they were taught more effective hand washing techniques so they wouldn't come down with illnesses.
Looking for 1% gains, I think.
So it's this idea of incremental
1% gains. And
so I was thinking, like, what would be the equivalent if, like, we're that coach? Well, we're not that coach in our dreams. No, that's our identity. We're working on.
Exactly. That's the identity we're going for. What would be the equivalent? So things like, I think maybe things like that, getting them to do 5 minutes a day, and saying it doesn't have to be. You don't have to be reading, watching every single film and second in English, or like sat at home typing your notes up every night after class. Looking for incremental things. What other ones do you think they could be? Well, there's so many.
Well,
go for it.
No. Well, for example, he talks about your environment and how he talks about, like, I think there's also a lot of things to do with people don't admit necessarily. You can even feel ashamed of, like you've talked about. I mean, I have this identity of being a runner. For example, I run a marathon, and in general, I run consistently. But I go through periods of not running, and like I moved house about a month ago, and I haven't run for this past month, and my morale has like, and so it's kind of like I'm in this state where I'm like, well, no, you're not a runner because you're not running.
Yeah.
But so I'm in this weird, like I really feel the need to get back to it just for my general well-being.
Because you're in a new environment, because you've moved house, you haven't.
Yeah, so I feel completely thrown off. And so there's a certain amount of, I don't know if I say shame, but there's a lot of negative feeling around not living up to your own expectations. And he talks, he talks about willpower and how we often think of the people who are successful. I actually think maybe there's this woman called Susie Moore. I heard her on a podcast. She was really great. I really liked her message. She just came out with a book, and I think it's called Make It Easy. And again, this is like this is when everyone goes, they grow and they go, oh, yeah. Oh, he's drunk the Kool-Aid. That's, self-help addict. But I think also we tend to think of people who succeed as being gluttons for punishment, like people who just love working themselves to the bone.
Yeah.
And I actually think that a lot of us don't have like I think genuinely like people who are effective and successful, and not in the sense of winning an Oscar or getting filthy rich, but in more just mundane but meaningful ways, like no, but they talk about, willpower is not, so because we often think, well, those people who succeed, it's because
they must have lots of willpower. Yeah.
And he talks about how it's like you have to design your environment so that like people who avoid temptations are people who design their environment so that the path of least resistance leads you to the desired habit. So
for the good habits.
I tell my students, for example, it's kind of silly. I don't know if it really has an impact, but he talks about environment design, and he talks about, like, for example, I have a huge sweet tooth. I can't have.
Me too.
So I mean, people are horrified when they see the amount of paste. I mean, I went to Portugal once and I ate my way through every. It was like my partner at the time. He was appalled at just how the quantity of pastries I ate. Okay, but my solution to that is that at home there are no sweets. And obviously, sometimes I give in and I go out and I don't know. But on the whole, just like not having sweets at home makes it a lot easier. If people bring in sweets, or when I go, like last summer when I was in Canada, and I was furious with my family because my father would come and they'd bring all these massive, it was in Canada, right? So it's like these American-sized portions. They would have these muffins that were the size of my head. And of course, it was in a new environment. I was so frustrated because I couldn't stick to my usual good habits because I was surrounded by temptation. So I tell my students with Quizlet, I say, okay, if you are, we can't deny reality. If a lot of you are hooked on Instagram or it's probably, or TikTok, whatever, install the Quizlet app on your phone, put the icon next to the app, the one that sucks most of your time. So at least it'll be that you'll constantly have that little voice inside going, I could invest in the smarter me, or I could, get some more celebrity gossip, and then they might,
Yeah, definitely. That's something I told my students last night. Okay, move the Quizlet logo now. Put it next to your most used app. Yeah, because there's the other things we do at home, like you said, your idea of not having any sweets, or all the typical ones of, if you want to go to the gym, lay out all your gym clothes the night before, have everything ready so that you just walk out the door with your gym bag, which have definitely worked for me in the last 6 weeks. But yeah, we need to come up with a list of other ones for our students. And a good one for reading for me is the one who says about make the bed and put the book on top of your pillow. So that when you get into bed at night, the book is there. Yeah,
that's also the idea of like you get like an environment design, like and also he talks a lot about triggers and cues. How we don't realize that we're we talk about creatures of habit. So we don't realize that so if you put you're reading material in a certain spot, you'll end up kind of associating it.
Yeah, definitely.
And also, I was going to
ones?
say another thing that maybe in terms of, I was thinking habits, going back to Paul Nation, one of his insights is that actually he suggests, I mean, I'm not saying it's the, we should take his word as, we could take it with a grain of salt, but he suggests that a third of teaching time in a course should be devoted to revision.
Yeah.
And that's maybe more on us as teachers. Actually giving, I think maybe this is the problem, we're always thinking like in education, like this idea that more homework, more time out. And I think in an ideal world, that's great. But I notice that my students like also giving them time in class to test each other using Quizlet.
Definitely. That's something I try and incorporate. I wouldn't say a third, but I'm happy to push it closer to a third because it's definitely really valuable. And I'd much rather study fewer things, but study them in greater detail, I think, and have students feel that they've properly acquired language rather than bombard them with too much content.
Yeah. And maybe I think we're probably, we should probably conclude soon, but I want to go back to before we started recording, we were talking about things that we wanted to discuss, and I feel really strongly, I did an episode about a month and a half ago about the Philistinism of English language teaching, EFL. Philistinism being kind of like, I don't know, an old-fashioned word that I don't even think a lot of people makes me sound like an old fart. But Philistinism being, like just like a lack of culture, a lack of, because basically we know that, especially because at the levels that we teach, to achieve really high levels of fluency, and it's not just fluency, it's sounding idiomatic. It's like sounding like a proficient speaker. So it's using lots of idioms, phrasal verbs, and this doesn't just have, like, I still feel that the culture in a lot of schools, we know that students need, we're very good at being supportive, but I think we're not always good at kind of using confrontation not confrontation necessarily, but I just notice a lot of my C2 students think that they're going to, like I tell students, that achieving this level of fluency is a real feat. It's and it's not, I don't think it's not a measure of intelligence, but it's basically like signing up to run a marathon or to be a high performance athlete. And so, so this means lots of input, lots of reading, lots of listening and challenging, because I think a lot of people who sign up to these levels, like it's connected to being, knowledgeable about the world in general, and being well read, and being curious. And so I think if we talk about motivation, I think I don't know, you can tell me what you think. It sounds maybe a bit old fashioned, but I think at schools, we just focus on English. And I think actually, like at this level, it's more English as a vehicle for a broader identity, like someone who is curious about the world. And it doesn't mean that English is the only, it's not, they can be knowledgeable about the world. You don't have to speak English to be intelligent or, but nowadays, a lot of, you think about like scientific research, English is the vehicle for most research, a lot of pop culture. And so,
no, definitely. I think we have to move beyond, just the teaching of language, the teaching of the expressions and the phrases, because, like you said, it's so much richer than that, and it's a vehicle for so much more, so much more culture, so much more information, like you're saying, scientific research, or introducing them to literature. Half the time you look up some of these words that come up in the proficiency textbook, and the origin is Shakespeare, or the origin is, I don't know, Dickens or something like that.
The Bible. We should start reading
the Bible. Yeah.
Bring back the Bible.
Bring back the Bible.
Okay, kids, I'd like you all to buy a copy of the St.
Bible
James
studies.
Bible.
Yeah, it's full of great language.
The 10 Commandments.
Yeah, exactly. And we can't just ignore that side of things. I think it has to be not necessarily Bible studies, but we have to has to be more holistic, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I think maybe this is a conversation to be continued another day.
Definitely.
So thank you very much, Tim, for getting in touch to be on the podcast.
No problem.
And
Thank you very much for having
why don't
me.
you remind everyone about your website?
So the website is freeenglishLessonplans.com. You can check it out there. I try and post. Well, another thing from the book is trying to have regular posting days. So I try and post every Monday and Thursday when I manage to. And I also have a podcast, 2 Ts in a Pod, that I present with Katie Wright. Which you can find on SoundCloud. If you look for SoundCloud, 2 Ts in a Pod. That's 2 T's as in teachers, and we are Katie and Tim in a pod. And we'll have to get you on in the future.
Definitely. And what about your TikTok?
Oh, we have a TikTok that we've just started. It is tiktok.com/2tspod. That's 2 T, the letter T, S pod, P-O-D. And we're releasing short videos every day. I actually have a recording session this afternoon to record a bunch more. We're trying to do little short videos on pronunciation and functional language and vocabulary.
Fantastic. Thanks a lot, Tim.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye.